Hello, happy Tuesday. We're going to do the clue review for last Thursday's game, Mystery Grape and Blind Tasting Benchmark Region. That was Cortese from Gavi in Piedmont. It's a tough grape, but I know a lot of you guys were just like pulling your hair, just like, on that one. But it is one that I felt was worth doing. I actually has hesitated featuring this one quite a bit, even when I was doing Mystery Grape under my original Spit Bucket account, because it's so tough. These kind of fairly neutral Italian whites, high acid, pale lemon, a little minerality. There's so many of them, and there's nothing that just jumps out and screams, I'm Cortese, with that. And so it's tough. Thankfully, in most blind tasting exams, it's not one you often get by itself as a one-off. It's often featured in the context of the region, like Piedmont, next to a Nebbiolo, a Barolo. That is a very distinctive red wine. Barbera, Dolcetto, those are fairly distinctive. So you have help with that. You don't have to get it just by itself. But again, as Noelle and I talk about frequently on the exams, nailing the wine, it feels so good, but it's only a few points with that. The vast majority of your points, over 90% of your points, come from your tasting note and then the logic that you use to connect things. And sometimes that logic leads you to other things. If you were going logic based on a flight of two red wines, a Barolo, let's say a Dolcetto, which is common, and you're like, yes, I'm in Piedmont, and you have this white that is an Italian white that's got, pale lemon color, some citrus fruits on there, and maybe it's Arneas. You would get a lot of points, even if you didn't nail the exact wine. So don't stress so much about that. Focus on making a good tasting note and what the clues in the glass are telling you. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go with Cortese here with the breakdown. So these were the clues from the last game. Clue 1, lemon and lime, citrus notes. Piedmont, northern Italy, moderate continental climate, so not cool climate, but definitely not warm southern Italy. So citrus fruits make a lot of sense, as does stone fruits and tree fruits. So clue number 2, I did peaches, but I focused on the peach skin. So phenolics, a little bit of grippiness. You got the flesh, but also the skin, and you'll see that kind of come back here again. Clue 3, apples, and I love the clue I did that had the different types of apples, and I really encourage you, to practice and start thinking about that. Go to your store, go to your farmer's market, get different types of apples, because they do tell you so much. For this one, I described this one a little bit more closer, kind of like a pink lady type. It's not quite a green apple with the tart, and it's not as sweet as a Honeycrisp. So it's kind of like that little subtle tartness, little subtle sweetness. For me, that's what kind of resonates with a lot of these northern Italian whites on there. But for your own, taste different apples. See what you kind of come up with on there. Because from your own tastings, a green apple tastes very, very different than a Golden Delicious apple with that, or a Honeycrisp with that. Clue 4 was pears. Went with green pear, a little bit tartar pear, but again, focusing on the skins. So flesh and the skins on it. Because the phenolics, it's hard to get a tell with Italian whites, but there is in somewhat of a tell with Italian wines that you see a theme throughout reds and whites, is that a lot of them have that little subtle phenolic bitterness. And I've been reading through a lot of sources trying to, find out what the causes of that is, because you see it in so many different varieties. And there's a lot of sources that talk about the tradition in Italy of pressing harder. So you're getting a little bit more extraction, getting a little bit more of phenolic grips, even with the white wines on there. Historically, with the whites, harvesting, even before machine harvesting, as warmer climates there, late summer, early August, or early autumn, as soon as you pick the grapes off the vine, they start macerating. So hand harvesting a bunch of white grapes, they're macerating in that bin until you get it pressed. That's going to extract some phenolics. There's also the nature of the grape. Some of these grapes have thicker skins on there that can give you a little bit more of that phenolic grip on there. And you see it definitely with the red wines. The tradition of food pairing, a lot of these wines have a little bit of bitterness in them, pair really well with food on it. But you also see a little bit of it with the whites. So one of the things I encourage when you're tasting your apples tasting your pears, get a peeler. And yes, you can just bite in the apple and get a little bit of it, but you're getting a lot of the flesh too. But try to focus on getting a little bit of the skin and really focus on tasting the skin. You get the flavor of it, but also think about that texture. And when you're pairing it with your white wines, on you're doing your practice, see where you get a little bit of overlap. The drier the white wine is with it, the more you're going to get that little bit of phenolic bitterness towards the end. All right, clue 5, bitter. I did white flowers, and it's kind of vague white flowers. You didn't have to really focus on identifying it with it, because it's, for a lot of these neutral grapes, they're not jumping out and screaming, hey, I'm a lily, or I'm a violet, or I'm, orange blossoms with that. So just kind of a vague white floral note. And you were doing a tasting exam, you'd go blossom. And then clue 6, lemongrass. So kind of a citrusy herbal note. For me, when I think agave, I think lemony with it. I'm pairing it with lemony things. I love Gavi with like white fish on there. So lemongrass and then the lemon citrus notes on there. Going into the structure clues, pale lemon. You might also get a little bit of a green hue sometimes. When you see, it's not a WSET approved term, so I wouldn't put pale lemon with a green hue on an exam, but just make a mental note when you're seeing that in a blind tasting, because that little bit of greenness in a white wine, it could be a cool climate, like you'll often see like that green note like in a Chablis, but it also could be from high yields. And a lot of Italian wines often are produced from fairly high yields. The grapes like to be bountiful, and just the DOCs and DOCGs, they tend to have a higher max yield than you would see in like a lot of like AOCs in France. Light intensity could be in the medium minus, but it's never going to knock you on your socks with that. It's more subtle on it. Dry, high acidity. Definitely a trademark. And this is the biggest distinction between this wine and Arneas. Arneas is more in that medium minus acid, while Cortese is more high acid. So I put in the recap, how I kind of feel like, Cortese goes a little bit more Sauv Blanc like, while Arneas kind of is a little bit of a wannabe with the Viognier. It's never going to be as pronounced and aromatic as a Viognier, but, you have the peaches, you've got more, I would say, almond blossom with Arneas versus, orange blossom with Viognier. But it's like kind of like Arneas is trying a little hard, but it just can't really get there. So, and that shadow of Viognier, because Viognier is also another lower acid grape. So that's kind of the ideal. Also, it stuck with me early in my studies, reading about Arneas. The name apparently means like rascal in the dialect, but it also was historically interplanted with Nebbiolo. Kind of like you think of like the Syrah, co-ferments, Viogniers. It didn't really add as much aromatics because Nebbiolo doesn't need the help with that. Like you think of Viognier adding some aromatics with Syrah, but it did help fix color with that and soften a little bit of Nebbiolo's tannins. So I thought that was a little bit fun. And that's how that kind of association, and just in my own studies, to separate these two white wines of Piedmont. But the acid is the big distinction. So that's what you want to focus on. Then body, medium bodied, medium alcohol. It's not going to go to either extremes with that. Very much a northern Italian white. When you get to southern Italy, some of the southern Italian whites, Fiano, Greco, those can get a little bit in the higher alcohol. You're going to feel more body, more weight because it's warmth. Going south, getting riper, getting bigger, getting more with that versus north. So again, Italians, wines, hard. Italian whites, really hard, but they're delicious to drink. They're delicious to practice with. I wouldn't stress so much in the practice. As I mentioned in the recap that is with the photo on the Instagram page, I would focus most of my study practice on the reds. Those are going to be your bankers. And then a few of the key whites with that. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or Noelle. Noelle actually did a really great Italian immersion series that members of our Elevage Wine Coaching can review, and she talks a little bit about the many different Italian wines, including Italian whites. And might do another series going up, highlighting some of these particular grapes. And today I've got the Geeky Grape going on. We're in Australia today. See if you guys can check out the IG stories and figure out today's. It won't be as hard as I think last week's were. All right, have a good one. Bye.